The morning had started like any other. The sun was just beginning to peek through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the kitchen as I flipped the pancakes. The smell of breakfast filled the air, and I could hear Noah, my 5-year-old, humming happily in the background. He was in his usual state of excitement, his energy practically vibrating through the walls. It was a school day, and despite the usual early morning rush, Noah had somehow managed to be in a great mood. I had gotten up early to make sure we weren't running late, something I always tried to avoid, but sometimes failed to do. Noah had his own little routine, and I made sure to follow it. After he brushed his teeth and got dressed, he always had to pick out his own socks, even though they rarely matched. Today, it was a bright green one on the left foot and a blue one on the right. I laughed as I looked over at him, noticing his mismatched socks, but I didn't mind. It was just part of who he was, and I loved him for it. As I placed the last pancake on his plate, Noah bounced into the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder, ready for the day. He was so eager to get to school, to see his friends, and to be part of the activities that awaited him. I reminded him to make sure he had everything packed, his lunch, water bottle, and his jacket, which he would inevitably forget in the morning chaos. He zipped through his checklist and headed for the door without another word, leaving me to clean up after breakfast. I watched as he bounced out to the car with his ever-present enthusiasm, his little feet nearly skipping along the sidewalk. The drive to school was short, only about 10 minutes, but those minutes were always filled with our usual morning banter. We talked about what was happening at school, his plans for recess, and whether or not he would finally conquer the monkey bars today. He was always determined to get better at them, even though he hadn't quite figured out how to hold on without slipping just yet. I told him to be careful, as I always did, but he just nodded, his mind already on the next big thing. When we arrived at the school, I parked near the entrance and reminded him to be careful while crossing the playground to the gate. "I love you, buddy. Have a great day," I said, kissing him on the cheek. He ran ahead, barely looking back as he waved goodbye. It was such a simple moment, so typical, so routine. Little did I know, this would be the last time I'd see him in one piece that morning. After dropping him off, I drove to work, feeling that small, warm glow of contentment you get when you know your child is safe and happy. As I parked in my office lot, I was already thinking about what to make for dinner later, planning out my day. Everything felt perfectly normal, but just an hour later, I would be thrust into a nightmare that I couldn't have predicted. The phone rang unexpectedly while I was at my desk, and when I saw the school's number on the caller ID, I didn't think much of it at first, but the voice on the other end, panic in the background, would tell a different story, one I was not ready for. That was the moment when everything I thought I knew about safety and trust would be shattered. It wasn't until later that morning that everything started to unravel. My phone rang unexpectedly while I was sitting at my desk, preparing for an important meeting. When I saw the school's name pop up on the caller ID, I didn't think much of it. Maybe Noah had forgotten something, or was having a small issue with a classmate. I answered, expecting to hear the usual minor concern, but instead, I was met with a trembling voice on the other end. "Mrs. Carter?" the receptionist said, her voice strained. "I need you to come to the school immediately. There's been an incident." I froze. My stomach dropped. What happened? "Is Noah okay?" I managed to ask, though my voice felt small and distant. There was a brief silence on the other end before she spoke again. "Your son, Noah. He's been taken." The word hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the very weight of it was enough to make everything else around me disappear. "What do you mean, taken?" I asked, my voice shaky, barely able to understand the gravity of what she was saying. I heard a muffled conversation in the background before she came back on the line. A woman came to pick him up from school. She said she was his grandmother. She showed them a photo and convinced the staff she had permission to take him early. I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me. My thoughts immediately flashed to Carol, the woman from the HOA, the one I had seen around the neighborhood, always with that strange, calculating look in her eyes. It didn't make sense. How could this be happening? How could they have let her take him? I asked, the disbelief starting to bleed through my voice. I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears, each pulse louder than the last. They didn't realize anything was wrong until it was too late, she explained, her voice now filled with guilt. She seemed very convincing. "We're so sorry, Mrs. Carter." I could barely process her words. All I could hear was the part about my son being taken. My son, my little Noah, was out there somewhere with a woman I didn't know, who I feared might not have his best interests at heart. I could already feel the dread pooling in my chest, tightening my throat. I didn't waste another second. My heart was hammering in my chest as I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door of my office, barely registering the questions my colleagues asked as I flew past them. My mind raced with 1,000 scenarios, none of them good. What if Carol had already gotten too far? What if she was taking him somewhere I couldn't reach in time? The ride to the school was a blur. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles were white, my foot pressing the accelerator harder than usual, desperate to get there. My phone buzzed incessantly, but I didn't have the presence of mind to answer. I was consumed by the fear of not getting to Noah in time. When I arrived at the school, I rushed inside, almost knocking over a few chairs in the lobby as I demanded to see the principal. The staff looked apologetic, but also seemed shaken, as if they couldn't believe what had happened either. They explained how Carol had shown up just after Noah's class finished a morning activity. She claimed to be his grandmother, presented a photo of a woman who vaguely resembled my own mother, though no one could really confirm it was her, and somehow convinced the school staff that I had asked her to pick him up early for a dentist appointment. She even had the name of a supposed appointment, one I had no recollection of, but the woman's calm demeanor and the fact that she had known enough about our family made it seem legitimate. It didn't help that Carol had known about the details of the school schedule. She knew when I would drop Noah off, and when his class would have its break. My gut twisted with the thought that she had been watching us, preparing for this moment. Her obsession with control had gone far beyond the rules of the neighborhood. It had now seeped into my personal life. I was informed that by the time anyone realized something was wrong, Carol had already left the school grounds, with Noah in tow. They had attempted to reach her by phone, but she never picked up. In a haze of disbelief, I called the police. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare unfold in front of me. The officers assured me they would respond quickly, but the truth was that I didn't know what to believe anymore. My son, my precious boy, was out there with someone who had no business taking him. I tried to stay calm as they took the details, but in my mind, I was already searching for him, desperate to find him before something worse happened. I could only pray that the police would find him before Carol got to foreign, that my son would be safe. As soon as I hung up the phone with the school, my heart pounded like a drumbeat in my chest, drowning out every other sound. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, the urgency of the situation making the call feel like a foreign task. When the dispatcher picked up, I had to force myself to speak. My mouth felt dry, my mind in a haze. As I tried to relay the situation, "My son has been taken from school," I managed to say, my voice cracking with fear. A woman she pretended to be his grandmother. "The school let her take him. Please, you have to help me." The dispatcher remained calm, assuring me that help was on the way. But to me, each second felt like an eternity. I could almost hear my son's small voice in my head, asking me why I wasn't there to protect him. I fought back the tears that threatened to spill, knowing I couldn't let my fear cloud my judgment. I had to stay focused. The officers at the school had already begun taking down details, but their actions, though swift, didn't seem fast enough. I kept picturing Carol's smug face, how she always seemed to be watching from the corner of her eye during HOA meetings, her disapproving gaze following every parent, every child. But I hadn't imagined she would ever go this far. I hadn't imagined she would actually take Noah. They told me the first step was to track Carol's car, and as they began their search, I was told to wait. Wait. That word felt like a punch to the gut. My mind screamed at me to move, to do something, but I had no idea where to start. I couldn't just run through the streets, looking for her. The police were the ones with the resources. I had to trust them, but my instinct was to act, to find him now. I could feel the minutes stretching out, each one heavier than the last. I paced the school lobby, trying to absorb what had just happened. My phone buzzed again, but it was just the school checking in. They still hadn't heard back from Carol, and the principal seemed as shaken as I was. "We're doing everything we can," she said, though her voice didn't sound certain. I hung up, barely hearing her last words as I tried to keep my mind from spiraling. What if Carol had taken him out of the city, away from everyone? What if she had already planned this, knowing exactly when and where to strike? And then, the dreaded thought hit me. What if Noah was scared? What if he didn't understand why this stranger, this woman he'd never met, was taking him? The thought twisted my gut. The helplessness I felt was unbearable. I got into my car and drove to the police station, unable to sit still any longer. Every light seemed like an obstacle. Every turn in the road, a delay I couldn't afford. As I pulled up to the station, the officers were already there, waiting for me. They had a lead. They had spotted Carol's car on the outskirts of town. I had no idea where they were going, but at least there was movement now. At least there was a direction. My stomach churned with a mix of hope and dread. I'd heard the term chasing ghosts before, but this time, it felt real. We were all chasing the ghost of Carol, chasing a woman who had somehow slipped through our fingers and now had my son in her grasp. The police had set up a perimeter on the road, but Carol's car was fast, too fast. She had the head start. The officers told me to stay put while they worked with the local highway patrol to track her down. They promised they would update me every few minutes, but those minutes felt like hours. My mind kept playing out the worst-case scenarios. What if Carol had already taken him to a place we couldn't find her? What if she was already trying to get him out of state? Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the police confirmed that they had located Carol's car. It was parked by the side of a desolate road, far from any other vehicles. The officers quickly moved in, and I waited with bated breath, clutching my phone in one hand and trying not to imagine the worst. When they found her, Carol was standing by the car, her back turned, oblivious to the police closing in. Noah, though, was a different story. He was nowhere near Carol. He had wandered, confused and scared, toward a group of nearby trees, his small figure barely visible in the distance. He looked like he was trying to find his way back to safety, but the fear in his eyes was clear, even from a distance. The police approached cautiously, and they called his name. Noah turned, and the relief that washed over me was so intense it almost knocked me to the ground. There he was alive, safe, and as soon as he saw the officers, he ran to them. I could see the tremor in his tiny body, the confusion still clouding his face, but he was alive. He was safe. As the officers placed Carol in custody, I could hardly breathe, still trying to absorb the reality that it was finally over. The nightmare was ending. But even as I stood there, watching Noah approach me, I felt the weight of the entire experience pressing down on me. How close we had come to losing him. How fragile everything had seemed just moments before. I didn't care about anything else at that moment. All that mattered was that Noah was in my arms. I held him tightly, as though I could somehow protect him from the fear and uncertainty that had just threatened to consume us. When the police finally brought Noah to me, I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or collapse in relief. All I could do was hold him tightly, feeling his small body trembling against mine. He didn't understand what had happened, not really. To him, it had just been another confusing, frightening experience. One that didn't make sense and would likely fade into a blurry memory once he felt safe again. But for me, it was an experience that would change me forever. The officers led Carol away in handcuffs, and I watched her, this woman who had so easily manipulated the system, who had taken my son without a second thought, as she was placed in the back of a squad car. Her expression was unreadable, and there was a coldness to her that I couldn't quite place. I had never imagined that someone could do something like this, and the thought that she had been so calculating, so patient in her plan, made me sick to my stomach. Her face seemed to say that she had done nothing wrong, that this was all part of her entitled view of the world, where rules didn't apply to her. As the police gathered their evidence, I couldn't tear my eyes away from Noah. I whispered his name, over and over again, as if saying it out loud could make sure he was real, that he was really here. I kissed his forehead, brushing the stray hairs away from his face. He clung to me, his little hands gripping the front of my shirt, his eyes wide with confusion. But he was safe. He was alive. But even as the immediate danger passed, the weight of what had happened settled heavily on my chest. I wasn't sure if I was in shock or if the adrenaline rush had simply worn off, but I felt numb. The terror that had filled my body just hours earlier now gave way to a haunting emptiness. How could this happen? How had it happened? I kept replaying the events in my mind, Carol's calm demeanor, the way she had manipulated the school staff, the fear that had taken root in my chest when I realized Noah was gone. The police assured me that they would press charges against Carol for kidnapping and child endangerment. She would face legal consequences for what she had done, but the knowledge didn't bring me much comfort. The damage had been done, and it was something I would carry with me for a long time. I kept thinking about how easily she had gotten away with it, how close she had come to succeeding. It could have been so much worse. Over the next few days, I spoke with detectives and gave my statement. It was clear that Carol had been planning this for some time. She had researched the school's pickup procedures, had studied Noah's schedule, and had known just when and where to strike. She had even gone as far as to fabricate a story about being a relative, one she knew would be believable enough to let her walk right through the school gate with my son in tow. The whole thing felt like a bad dream I couldn't shake off. No matter how hard I tried, the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip after the incident. Friends, neighbors, and even people I didn't know began texting and calling to check in, to express their disbelief. How had this happened? How could someone so close to home be capable of such a thing? The HOA, of course, was quick to distance themselves from Carol, despite her long-standing role as one of the most vocal members. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the fact that Noah had been at the center of something truly terrifying. At first, Noah didn't want to talk about it. He was too young to understand the full extent of what had happened, but I knew it had shaken him. Every time we passed the school, he would go silent, his little face clouding over with confusion. He would ask questions that broke my heart. "Why did she take me, Mommy?" he asked one night as we snuggled on the couch. "Was I bad?" I held him close, fighting back tears. "No, sweetheart, you weren't bad. You were just scared. She was the one who was wrong." It took time for Noah to feel safe again. He didn't want to go back to school for a while, and I couldn't blame him. I felt a lingering unease too, something that made it hard to trust the world the way I had before. The feeling that someone, anyone, could have such power over my child, that something could go wrong in an instant, those feelings haunted me in the quiet moments. When I was alone with my thoughts, the police eventually concluded their investigation. Carol was charged, and though she had a lawyer who tried to downplay her actions, the evidence was damning. She was sentenced to prison, and the town, which had once quietly accepted her overbearing ways, was left in a state of disbelief. But for me, the legal outcomes didn't matter as much as the emotional scars left behind. The weeks that followed were filled with therapy sessions for Noah and me. We had to work through the trauma, slowly rebuilding the trust we had lost. It wasn't easy, and there were days when it felt like everything was still too raw, but we took it one step at a time. One day, Noah told me he was ready to go back to school. His teachers were understanding, giving him the space he needed to heal. And with time, he started to smile again, though there was a wariness about him that hadn't been there before. For me, the experience never fully faded. I was always on alert now, always aware of the risks, of the ways that people can turn a simple day into a nightmare. But I also learned the importance of community, of family, of being vigilant and protective in ways I hadn't considered before. And so, life slowly began to return to normal. But nothing would ever be the same. My relationship with Noah was stronger than ever, tempered by the ordeal we had faced together. And though I had learned that safety could be an illusion, I also knew that the most important thing in the world was Lavande, the strength it gave us to face even the darkest of times.